Hello and welcome to Newspeak, the New Culture Forum's weekly look at the news agenda. I'm joined, I'm very pleased to say, as usual, by Rafe Heydel-Mankoo and Dr. Philip Kiszely, our senior fellows. And we're going to be talking about, obviously, the events of this week. Before we do that, I just want to mention that this week, just past, we had the inaugural event of our 9th branch. You know, we have been going around and setting up local groups of the NCF. This one was in Salisbury, and we had 52, 53 people there. What a turnout. And this is incredibly encouraging. So I think we have one more before Christmas, if not two, and so I will keep you informed here. We're recording this. This is going out on Saturday, Armistice Day. I wanted to talk first about the remarks, which are quite unprecedented, of Suella Braverman, particularly when she was talking about selective policing. Now, this is the Home Secretary, who is the ultimate boss, isn't there? Here? What did you make of this activity?
Well, this was an article that was published today in the Times, I think, and she was essentially saying that there is a two-tier system of policing. She was referring specifically to the protests, but she referred back to the protests of 2020, 2021, the anti-lockdown protests, and she compared those to the BLM protests, and she was saying essentially it's political policing. Yeah. I think it's pretty unprecedented, as you say. I can't think of another Home Secretary who would come out and essentially attack the police for their ineptitude, their conscious, we're not talking unconscious bias here, we're talking conscious bias, and their complete inability to see the wood from the trees. I mean, we are talking, we're looking at Saturday, we're looking at potentially 1 million people parading through the streets of London. We know, because these have been going on every week for weeks now, we've had train stations occupied, we've had swastikas on display, we've talked about all of this kind of thing. We saw a fellow carrying a placard saying Hamas are terrorists, and he was attacked by everybody around him. Now, what the apologists for these protests will say, oh, it's just a minority. I would take that example and say, no, it isn't a minority, because all of those people just happened to be around him. Everybody was there, attacked him.
It was a random sample.
It was a random sample. Now, the police seem to be perfectly okay with this. They're letting this go ahead. Now, you think what happened with the lockdown protests? You know how brutal they were. I mean, I remember one pensioner, a woman who was knocked down and kicked around. So, on the one hand, it's really good that she's come out and said this, okay. But for me, it's classic. On the other hand, it's classic Toriness, in the sense that someone will say something, but nothing will get done. There'll be no follow-up, nothing will happen. It's just what happens time and time again.
Do you think, actually, Rafe, that, is there a head of steam coming up to get rid of her in amongst the Tory party? This is what I've heard,
Yeah, well, before I get to that, I just want to say, and I'm quite serious when I say this, I think Suella Braverman, or her speechwriter, watches our channel, because this is twice now in 2 months that they've come out with things which are almost word for what we've been saying now. For example, 2 months ago, last month, we were the only, well, we've been for the last 2 years, the only channel to say that we've had more immigration in the last 25 years than in the last 2,000 years, in that form of words, and nobody else has even made that point. The exact same frame, the exact words were used by Suella Braverman. We again, since October the 7th, we've been the only channel to actually routinely, constantly make this point, comparisons with the lockdown, with Sarah Everard, with BLM, and with this, and the number of arrests. And again, we're seeing that. So I just want to say, actually, I find it very interesting that there's such a similarity there. Look, obviously this is welcome.
Well, we do know that a lot of them watch this.
Yeah, I know, and I know a lot of people watch it. So actually, that's why I think, actually, they're getting, it's good at least to see that we're having some influence, even if we're not credited for it. This is obviously welcome. But you know, she is a very Johnny-come-lately to this party, and of course, we must always welcome people, however late they are, to the party. But of course, we are only a few months away from the next general election. I don't think she's going to. I mean, she may be removed shortly before. There's going to be one shuffling of the cabinet before the election to get a female Chancellor of the Exchequer in, because the Tory party want to do that before Labour gets in.
Yeah.
So we know there's going to be a shuffling. Whether she will survive that or not, I don't know. She's been given carte blanche to say all of these things, which people think are extreme, but are actually reflecting the mainstream, because they're in a last desperate pitch to try to get back that red wall vote. And being an Asian woman, they feel she's the only one who has the ability to say that. What's amazing is to see the reaction of some Tory MPs who think that she's outrageous. And it just goes to show you how far to the left of their own membership they are. But unfortunately, again, with this party, they talk tough, and then nothing ever happens.
Nothing happens.
These are great words, and I would be celebrating all of this if there was actually any examples in the past of where they've actually delivered on any of these items. And that's why I think, great, welcome to the party, but nothing that you've said is different to what we hear all the time now.
In fact, it's the opposite, isn't it? So the tougher they talk about immigration, the more dinghies we get coming in, the greater the legal immigration as well. And the tougher they talk about education, the tougher they talk about gender, the more of it. And I know, because I've just written a chapter about it. It's insane. The education system is a wild west of craziness. Okay, so they talk a good talk, but it's actually the opposite. What happens is the opposite to what they say.
You mentioned Tory MPs. You mentioned Tory MPs. The one I can think of is talk about sort of like sort of like surviving on your ancestors' reputation. Is Winston Churchill, grandson of the great man, who has said something about the march needing to go ahead or something like that. But what other Tory MPs have said anything about Suella Braverman? I mean, are there any particular ones?
I can't recall the names now, but as of this morning, yes, there were. I mean, people saying that she was that she'd lost the plot and that she was basically beyond
because
fail.
You see, I saw it was David Frost, who we've had on the channel actually, Lord Frost. He tweeted saying that she is obviously right about selective policing, and you can't expect people to basically deny the evidence of their own eyes. And I mean, I remember bringing this up on the London Assembly. This was during lockdown, when people were being really badly treated. Whatever you think about lockdown, really badly treated, as you said. And there was this amazing thing whereby Just Stop Oil, or Extinction Rebellion, I think it might have been, they managed to get to the cenotaph and stand around the cenotaph in November. It was actually near Remembrance, if not actually Remembrance, for about 20 minutes.
That's right, yeah. I think
How
that
happen?
That was their first big cause celeb, wasn't it? That was their first, when they really hit the headlines.
And they stood there.
Yeah.
And basically you think, wait a minute, now, there's either got to be some real kid glove stuff going on here, in which case, why? Do you think, would you go as far as to say, therefore, that the police are now just political enforcers?
Yes, I think so. I think they're beholden to the establishment, the new establishment that we've been talking about again for years and years and years, and which Matthew Goodwin has published on lately. They are literally serving a set of masters. It's a new set of masters, and they are. We know what they are. They're genderists. They're obsessed with the environment, and they want mass immigration. They just serve those. The police just serve those agendas. There's a massive, horrible, big class aspect to it as well. So it's working class people. The kinds of people that they will call gammons. Those people are just treated like dirt, and they're treated like dirt by the police as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a combination of three things. It's the worst sort of alignment of planets you could have. It's the complete capture of the institution by left-wing ideology, which has captured the elites and the police. But then you've got the youngest police force as well, because there's been such attrition over the last few years. It's been, all the new recruits there make up a much larger portion of the police force than before. And they've all been brought out of these universities where they've been inculcated. And on top of that also, you have the Macpherson report era people who were still thinking about political correctness that allowed the rape gangs to go on. So they're unwilling to touch any of these issues, and they still think Islam is a no-go zone. And of course, you have the whole issue where they simply think they don't have the capability to tackle any riots. I was just trying to think, would our modern police force have been able to deal with the football hooligans of the 80s? Would they have been able to deal with Arthur Scargill's National Union of Miners? We remember that police force. I don't think that the police force today have the chutzpah to actually tackle large groups of people any longer. So I think if you combine all of that together, it's a toxic mix.
Well, that isn't policy. They don't do that. They observe, don't they? They sit back and they observe, and then they might go in later. And,
well, they observe when it's their own type of people who are marching, like the Palestine. When it's lockdown, I mean, that's the thing, right? We had 2020, we had 150 arrests for a lockdown march. And there was an EDL march, which was far smaller than this Palestinian one.
Oh, it was tiny.
Another 150 people arrested.
Yeah.
What happened? There's 10 people arrested on the first one. I think 6 arrested at the second one.
And this is hundreds of thousands of people. Yeah. One of the worst things that happened to the police, I mean, there's a litany of things, but one of the worst things was when they decided that everybody should have a degree. So they have it's literally a connection from the universities to the police force, from the police force to the universities. They're essentially one and the same thing. And they think about criminals. There's a certain kind of criminal class, and those people are, quote, far right. Those far right people, I would consider myself among those people, actually. Those far right people are the people who are against anti-Semitism. But the establishment, the universities and all the people that they care for, they're very, very soft on anti-Semitism, and that connection is just
it's very interesting because, of course, we have a book coming out soon, and one of the chapters in which I wrote about education, and you can actually trace the start of the decay to when the independent teacher training colleges were abolished and universities began to train teachers directly. So our police force and our education system have all been trained by universities, and this is where you can really trace the rot to.
Yes. Do you know, it's interesting, by the way, the book that you refer to, the book that Rafe refers to, which you've both written chapters for, is called State of Emergency, and it's coming out in a couple of weeks' time. I'll make a proper announcement about it, but it's worth, as a heads up there.
This is the first time we've mentioned it.
Yes, it is.
Isn't it? Yeah.
State of Emergency. And the thing is that this is the third in what is effectively, it's like a trilogy, actually. We did something called the Long March to the institutions. Then we did Fighting Back. And now we have State of Emergency. Pretty self-explanatory, I think you'd agree. But actually on that point, when you look at the Long March, and during that time, I remember we were sort of like, because, we're thoughtful people and nuanced people, and we think, how serious is this Long March thing? And how, how much has the infiltration been? And is it, was it intentional? In other words, we were thinking about it all. And then what happens is you sort of think, this is much, much worse than I even thought. Has that occurred to you?
Yeah, I was just thinking about it today, actually, and I kind of suddenly realised that I've had a condition of what I would call low-level depression about the state of things from about 2015, and you could say it's much longer than that, of course it is. But for me, I felt we'd reached a point of no return round about then, and what we're seeing now, we've seen essentially the whole capitulation over the last 4 weeks. From the pogrom on the 7th, we're seeing open anti-Semitism in the institutions. We're seeing, you've, I think, just shared a clip today where people are chanting outside. Is it the University of London?
King's College, University of London. Extraordinary. That's we're talking about Thursday.
Yeah.
Group opening, so, basically praising their martyrs.
It's a sort of thing that you used to hear in Tehran and in Beirut.
But we're seeing it on the streets of London. And you're now seeing it on the streets of London outside St Mary le Strand, but the great James Gibb building, this vast crowd of Muslims saying we honour the martyrs because, of course, and then you have these mothers who are proud that their son has died because now they're a martyr, and they have photographs of them in their houses, and they become
revered figures in their village and so forth, and we've now imported that tradition, that culture to these streets. We should all be alarmed by it, because if they're celebrating martyrdom, they're welcoming martyrdom, how on earth can you engage with that sort of a society?
Yeah. Well, and today I've just seen an image from the University of Manchester, which is a poster with "Kill Jews" scrolled on it.
Yes, I've seen that. Yes. You see, the point is, I think you've made this point actually, haven't you? In one of the, we've been doing quite a lot of media lately, so I'm referring to that, where this is a kind of alliance, isn't it? One that's actually been there for quite a long time, but in this case, between Islamists, between hard left, by which we mean Socialist Workers' Party. I don't know whether you can look at the posters. I mean, to us it must be very familiar now. The posters of the Socialist Workers' Party are always the same, and their slogans are always the same, and everyone is carrying them. I'd love to know where they get their funding. But anyway.
But yes, I mean, as I said just yesterday, once you have Islamists allying with BLM and the Socialist Worker and Justum Oil, then you realise that there's a bigger strategy, there's a bigger game at play here. It's not about Palestine, this is about much bigger issues. It's about this virulent hatred they have for Israel, for the West, for capitalism, and for our way of life and our civilization. And we need to wake up to that. And of course there are people on those marches who are going there with noble intentions, who are genuinely concerned about what is actually terrible suffering in Gaza. But they are useful idiots. So Douglas Murray, I thought of this, and Douglas Murray said it yesterday. He said, if you go on a march and the people marching with you are neo-Nazis, maybe on the second march you think, maybe I won't go. And by the third one, definitely I won't go. These people are carrying on to march next to these people. And I think they're either useful idiots, or they're completely naive, or they're complicit in it.
Well, that's why I made that point before about the guy who was just attacked by everybody around him. Because we've all been doing this. We've been on television and radio and stuff every day, haven't we? And everybody's been saying to me, it's a small minority of people. It's a small minority of people. And I'm saying, how do you know?
Yes, exactly.
How do you know? Because all the evidence I'm seeing, it isn't a small minority of people. It's most of them, actually. And if you go onto the campuses, if you look at the institutions, I've been saying this about the institutions for weeks now. I'm like a broken record. A lot of it comes from the institutions. We've seen the jihadi doctor. We've seen the guy who was advising the Met, who was leading a chant from the river to the sea.
And there was a woman who's also part of their mentoring scheme.
Yeah, and there was a paediatrician. I was talking about a paediatrician in Newcastle, worked at Newcastle Royal Infirmary, who tweeted, "Gas the Jews, ha ha ha." These are people who are at the top of the institutions, or in the professions. These aren't people at the periphery. They're at the centre of British life, or what the excuse for British life, which we now have.
When this one today, this Million Man March or whatever they want to call it, I don't know, maybe you can tell me whether there are plans to have one next weekend, or whether this is kind of just going to go on and on and on. But just supposing it does, or if it doesn't, where do you think this leaves the police? I think it's been rather a wake-up call to a lot of people, the way the police have behaved. What would you like to see done with the police?
Well, I'd like to see them take a page out of the French and German books, essentially. The French have got hundreds of people in prison who they've arrested through all of this. The French have used water cannon and tear gas. Now, I don't think that's necessary in these cases, because people aren't actually physically rioting and so forth. But we don't even have a water cannon here, that's what the ridiculous state of affairs. We are so ill-equipped in the city to deal with things the way that they can deal with things on the continent. I think that's one of the wake-up calls, and that may be one of the reasons why the police actually don't feel comfortable enough in tackling any of this. But there needs to be strong enforcement. All of the troublemakers have been identified with the facial recognition technology we know now, those whose faces aren't covered. And we need to see all of this done, because if the police come down hard on these protesters, the marches will get smaller and smaller. It's because nothing's happening that activists are getting they're getting emboldened to be more radical each and every time. They're getting away with this stuff. You know, I did a Google search the other day. You don't get anywhere near as many hits on Paris and Berlin as you do on London protests. Here they're getting out of control because they're being treated with kid gloves.
So, Philip, what kind of reform, if anything, would you like to see of the police? I mean, I remember rather intemperately a while ago saying I should think they scrap them and start again. But I mean, how would one stop the rot in the police? I mean, you're talking about the reaction of police, but when you're talking about the actual institution of the police force, police service, then what should happen?
Well, I think that's the first thing. It needs to revert back to being a police force and not a police service. But I don't think it can happen, because if I've said this before actually, if you're going to reform the police, you need to reform everything around it. You can't just reform the police and have the judiciary the way it is, or have the other institutions, the civil service, the universities, and so on and so forth the way it is. It just won't work. That's what's really depressing for me, because I can't see any easy fix, any small easy fix. We're just too far down the line. The whole thing needs ripping up and starting again. The whole philosophy, the whole 50 years of thought that we've had, or what passes for thought, it just hasn't worked, and it's just fallen down so quickly. As I've said before, we've seen from October the 7th, we are seeing essentially the nearest thing we've ever had to National Socialism on our streets. And the institutions and the police force are completely powerless to do anything about it, not only because they're frightened, but because they're tied in knots by their own philosophy. Okay, because it's brown people essentially that are saying these terrible things, and it's the good people as well. It's the identitarian left who are absolutely, lots of them are intrinsically anti-Semitic. So it's all of these people, the people who are untouchable, they're saying all of these terrible things, and there is no mechanism to deal with it.
I think the one thing that struck me is the unbelievable vacuum when it comes to political leadership, wouldn't you say? I mean, at the time we've been talking about this, over the time we have been talking about it, the Prime Minister has had a conference about AI, I believe, hasn't he? And he's put his oar in a couple of times. I remember he put out a rather puny statement last week. A statement. I mean, why can't he say something? He made some sort of statement about it. Not that we should care, but what do you think the political fallout is going to be, at least start with the Tories? Because Keir Starmer's already getting into serious rubbish. But
well, I just want to go just on the issue of police reform as well, linked into this. What's really depressing is that there's not even any reason to have this discussion, because it's not going to happen, because of course we have a Labour government coming in. And what's annoying to me is, we could have had this discussion 5 years ago or 10 years ago and thought, hopefully, that there's a chance because we have the right government in place. So yes, we could have reform, and yet over 13 years nothing has been done. That's what makes it so disgraceful. And now it's almost futile to even have the discussion, because we know full well Labour will do nothing if not put the accelerator down on the way things are at the moment. And it's still, in the Westminster bubble and amongst politicians, it's amazing how few of them actually understand the depth of what's going on. These protests have actually begun the wake-up call, and what's been amazing to me is there are some people, some well-known figures and people in the world of Westminster who regard people like us as traditionally as being eccentrics, as being rather extreme in our viewpoints, who've suddenly been had the blinkers off. And one chap in particular I'm thinking of, a well-known person, he wrote, "I can see Britain having religious and ethnic violence on the streets in the near future." And for him to say that, I thought was remarkable, because he was so shocked by these protests. And I thought, why are you shocked by these protests?
Yes,
These protests
yeah.
are not shocking at all. This was entirely foreseeable. This has been festering, simmering below the surface. It just needed something to light the fuse. And I thought the naivety, we've had this for 20 years, it's been obvious of what was going to happen. And only now, when it's far too late. And you almost want to have Schadenfreude, but you can't because it's so depressing
Yes,
and devastating.
Yes,
And,
exactly.
and of course, allied to that as well, if we're talking about the police and how inept and just not fit for purpose they are, we were talking about this, weren't we? Imams up and down the country,
Yes.
mosques up and down the country, preaching blood-curdling hatred, jihad, killing Jews, you know, taking on the West and terrible, terrible things. This is caught on camera, this is published, and the police look at it and make a statement and say, oh, well, there's no law being broken here. You know, if
Yes,
you
they made that
compare-
step. That was
they made
Greenwich,
that
I believe. That was
statement.
Greenwich, was it?
Yeah.
Greenwich
Or the Met,
Islamic
yeah.
Centre. You know, it's all
Whereas Lawrence Fox talks about a ULEZ camera and gets the entire local
Yes, or
constabulary breaking
would
down
you
its
shadow,
door.
yes, exactly.
But it's the same. It's the same thing we started this conversation with, isn't it? And it's that two-tier policing that Suella Braverman pointed out, and will do nothing about it.
Well, look, we are going to be talking about this. I think this is I don't know, I'm sure you agree, I think a civilizational moment.
Yeah.
And I think Matthew Goodwin has actually done quite a bit of work on this in terms of his polling. And a huge number of people feel the way that we do, often without being able to quite put their finger on it, but they sense it, and they're right to sense it, actually, I think. But so we'll return to it. Rafe, thank you very, very much. And, well, on this Armistice Day, the very best to you, and we shall see you next week. Thank you. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.